immigrants who live in low-income communities are experts at creating something out of the little things available. This is a picture of my parents back in 1998 when they first immigrated to the US. And my mom always told me, ay Brittany, no teníamos nada ni en qué caernos muertos. We didn't have anything to fall dead on, essentially. That is the literal translation. And I would always feel a little like, Ama, like, what do you mean? Like, you didn't have anything? And she would be like, yeah. She would pull up this picture and she would be like, okay, look at the corner of that picture. So look at the corner of the picture. And she would be like, you see that furniture right there? It's fake. It's not real. It's cardboard. And I wrapped it around with elegant nude wrapping paper, and I just put a white blanket over it, and I was able to fool even the most expensive of eyes. Her doing. And she takes pride in it too. You know, because of her creativity, she was able to not only save money, reuse, reduce, recycle since 1998, but she was also able to create multiple pieces of furniture for less than $2.99, y'all. That's a steal. So my father, he is an investor essentially. And he has an eye, a good eye, for knowing when to invest in something a little over our budget. There was this one time that he told my sister, my little sister and I, okay, we're gonna go to a store, a Disney store, and you can buy whatever you want. Agarren lo que quieran, grab whatever you want. And this is unusual. So me and my sister were like, what? Y'all didn't have to tell us twice. Like, we ran to the Disney store, and of course I got Princess Bella, and she got Cinderella, I guess. But my sister and I, we were so excited to get these dresses. My dad looked at the prices, he gulped his own saliva and was like, okay, we're gonna do this. So he bought us the dresses and he made sure that we use them to the max. And I'm talking the max. For the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of my life, I was Princess Bella for Halloween. Nah, it really got to the point that my cousins didn't even ask me what I was gonna be for Halloween. They were like, oh, you're gonna be that princess that reads a lot of books, right? Yeah. But it didn't even stop there. There was this one time, it was my birthday, and my dad was like, oh, you don't need a dress, you don't need a dress. And he would like walk to my closet and take out the dress, and he would be like, let me tell you something. And then he would just pull the dress and I would be Princess Bella. But you see, every time I wore that dress, I wasn't just wearing a dress, I was wearing my parents' hard work. I was wearing my parents' dreams, unspoken dreams, and constant resilience. As a daughter of Mexican immigrants who are able to see potential in things that society deems as little, as under-resourced, as cheap, I have adopted the same pride and joy that my parents showcase whenever they're able to create something out of the little things. And it is one of the reasons why this dress is so important to me. You see, my mom, when she made that cardboard furniture, she was able to reimagine. And what society just saw as trash, she saw sustainability. She saw a step forward in assimilating to the American family. And my papa didn't just invest in a dress, he invested in dreams. You know, when we went to the Disney stores and I saw other usually blonde and blue-eyed girls, you know, making their way to the princess dresses, I was a little confused, but I also knew that it was so important for me to be in that space because my sister and I, we knew that my dad was teaching us that with a little bit of resilience, that with a little bit of patience, with a little bit of hard work, our dreams would be possible. And I think that it was also my dad's way of telling me, you can be successful here. You too can dream just as big, if not bigger, be what we couldn't, and live a life of wonder, one that is not destined for a brown girl like you. I buy you this dress so you know that your dreams come true. It'll just take a little bit more hard work from you. A little bit more hard work. It's true. My immigrant parents, although they reminded me that it was possible to succeed in this country, they also made sure to remind me that what I did have was not free. And they wanted me to firsthand experience what it was like to work, to pursue hard work as an immigrant. You know, to profit off the hustle, I had to join in on the hustle, and they're Mexican like that. So, around like first and second grade, my parents would pick me up from school. I was in Sandoval in the south side of Chicago, and they would take me to the suburbs, Los Suburbios, in like Naperville, Evanston, Chicago. And we would hustle. We had this like, okay, well, immigrants are masters at survival. And in order to survive, my parents and I, we would hustle through this hustle called fierreando. And fierreando means that we would accumulate fierro, iron and metals, from white rich suburban families, like that's just it. And we would exchange it for money. At times we would spend about 7 hours, 5 to 6 days on the weekdays and hustling for this. And unfortunately, sometimes it was not enough, so we had to hustle even more. I remember we would get home around like 10, 11 p.m. My parents would be so stressed, and I hadn't even finished my homework. But at that moment, it was okay, because at least we had enough fierro to survive. But the thing is, when you go fierreando, you can't just like glance. You really have to like dig inside. And I'm saying, like, imagine like there's like big garbage cans. You have to dig inside like stinky trash. You have to dig inside like huge amounts of garbage bags. And my parents did that, and I did that. And there was this one time I remember hearing this lady saying, "Stop, stop." And I looked, and it was a white woman in the suburbs. And my dad was like, "Oh, like, what's going on?" And we looked, and essentially what had happened was that she wanted us to stop putting the fierro inside the truck. She said, "Don't come here and steal." My papa refused, because he was like, "This is garbage. This is fierro. We can pick this up." She said, "If you don't stop, I'm gonna call the cops." We didn't have a permit, unfortunately, so we had to leave. And at that time, that day, we didn't have fierro anymore, so we left, not because we were scared, but because at that moment, survival outweighed any form of dignity. But my mamá, she said, "No te agüites. De poquito en poquito, llenamos la troca. Little by little, we'll fill the truck." And, well, I always find this very hard to explain. I have this whole speech prepared for all of you, you know, to be so honest. And it is such a hard thing to talk about, especially because I don't want to romanticize this. The truth is that at some point, accumulating fierro little by little allowed my dad to accumulate enough money to buy us a casita in the south side of Chicago. And my parents were so happy. Finally, they had their American dream. Finally, they had a house. Finally, we didn't have to move. We didn't have to live in a basement anymore. However, what is the American dream? My parents bought this house, and it was by hustling with my parents that I learned about the injustices that come off living off the little things. Despite putting food on the table, my parents were always in search of more. They wanted more, but when they weren't able to find more, they settled for the little they could find. They settled for the little fierro they could find. and they created something out of it. But the thing is that immigrants just don't wake up one day and they're like, ah, yes, let me spend an hour's worth of gas to travel to an area where I'll be oppressed, subjected to policing and people who detest the way I hustle for money so my children can one day not scatter for scraps the way I have. Because this country, a nation founded on slavery and the exploitation of black and brown labor, can't even provide adequate resources to those who are struggling. Latinx immigrants don't got time for that. We have learned to extract the most value out of the little things available solely because it is everything we have. And although there is so much pride and joy in creating something out of the little things, it is so important to not romanticize this mindset. As we continue to navigate this, I always ask myself, what happens when immigrant communities continue to hustle, to utilize the little things available to survive, but don't stop to question why we are expected to live off minimal resources in a country that preaches to be the land of the free? During the spring break, I had the privilege of being able to go to Ghana in Africa. And we visited, we were able to visit the last bath, and the last bath is essentially where African slaves were taken to have their last bath before they walked miles to castles where they were shipped off to the New World. In this specific moment, our lecturer, Kofi, he stated something that really stayed in my heart. And he said, slavery has not been abolished. It has transferred into our minds, enslaved minds. The question is, how do we free our minds from this state? It is important to recognize that Kofi's perspective on slavery stems from a deep understanding of the exploitation, torture, discrimination, and constant degradation that African slaves experience at the hands of colonizers. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, Brittany, what does slavery have to do with like working little by little to obtain your American dream? Or at least, I hope you're asking. And it has to do a lot. It really relates. And that is because slavery, physical slavery, was ultimately abolished. But slavery at its root, which is a mental one, is still present. Slavery continues to flourish. And one of the ways that it does is by brainwashing minority communities into conforming to the exploitation that capitalism subjects us to. One of my favorite memories as a kid was seeing my abuelita Toña come to the US during the summers. And this was because it was such a rare thing to do. My mom, she loved seeing my abuelita, and we all knew how rare these moments were because my abuelita wasn't able to come throughout the whole time. This was because the law demanded that we lived those 6 months to the fullest, my bad. Conformed to this. And by not being able to, by conforming to only 6 months, and I was exposed to the emotional exploitation that immigrants undergo when they're not able to be with their families fully, when they're not able to see their loved ones, when they're not able to see those who they care about. So the clock ticked, tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. And my abuelita was gone. And I saw my mom cry once again. And then I started to wonder, why was Abuelita Toña legally bound to leave after a certain time? Why didn't Abuelita Toña know how to read and write? And why couldn't my ama travel back to Mexico, back with her? And most importantly, why is it that immigrants are separated from their families and expected to work without rest, despite only living off the little things? And something continued to come up, and this was the emotional torture that immigrants had learned and continue to learn to conform to and become desensitized to and are forced to normalize because, hence the American dream. In order to reach your American dream, you must conform to the emotional exploitation of not seeing your loved ones. Is this normal? The system expects immigrants to be okay with this emotional exploitation and brainwashes us into thinking that this emotional exploitation is necessary to reach the American dream. Immigrants then conform to it. And as a kid, I knew that I was a citizen. Therefore, I had advantages over my parents. And I thought to myself, maybe if the US pardons undocumented immigrants from crossing the border, maybe if my parents are able to get their citizenship, maybe if my grandma does not die before my parents get to the border. Fear does things to people, and it has to me. When one grows up every day with the fear that you have everything to lose, everything every single day, there's no option but to play the game. Because behind the hope of finding fierro, there was the fear of not having enough to eat. Because the hope of not seeing my grandma, there was the fear, because behind the hope of seeing my grandma, there was a fear of never seeing her again. Fear is what fuels us subconsciously. It demands that we value the little things. But this is also a survival mechanism that is rooted in capitalism and the patriarchy. I encourage everyone to be open-minded about the little things and be open to seeing it as a contradiction. I am not a first-generation Latina who is going to stand here romanticize how my parents worked every single day of their lives and did not rest, and how capitalism sucked the life out of their hearts. I can't do that. I've seen the way that capitalism has exploited my immigrant parents, and I refuse to be a Mexican American who romanticizes it. But I will also acknowledge that valuing the little things has provided so much grace, has provided so much love, has allowed my immigrant family to continue to thrive and find so much resistance in being humble. Romanticizing the struggle that stems from creating something out of the little things is a tool that upholds white supremacy, as it encloses immigrant communities to believe that they are not worthy of a life outside of stress, constant labor, and a happy life. I'm a first-generation Chicana who wants to become someone in life, and it's so hard for me to even say that out loud, but I want to be known. I want to write a book one day, I want to be able to take my parents back to Mexico in hopes that they can see their families that they haven't seen in ages. I want to continue to explore the world and navigate what it means to be a woman who is not owned by anyone. Now, as I continue to navigate the world and seeing how my immigrant family resists systemic injustice, I am so empowered to say that my presence here, my presence in NYU, my presence in New York, my presence in this TEDx talk is a protest. So how do we free our minds from this state? Kofi asked. I say, by questioning, by shedding light on these injustices and calling them out, and by giving voice, most importantly, to those who have been forced to remain silent. Thank you.